What would Martin Luther King Jr. say if he saw Rodney King on the ground, surrounded by men paid to protect and serve, but who, at that moment, were hitting out of anger, hitting as if they weren't hitting a man, but a threat? If Martin Luther King were there, seeing Rodney's body trembling, his hands raised as a plea for mercy without a voice to say stop, because the scream was lost among the blows, what would he say to you? You listen to me now, but would you listen if I were in his place? Would you hear if it were my skin on the asphalt, my blood flowing from a mistake that wasn't mine? What must happen to the body of a black man for him to finally be seen as human? Rodney King was alive, and even after everything, he had the strength to ask the world if we couldn't, at least, try to understand each other. A man who was beaten as if he were nothing, asked for peace when no one wanted to hear. He did not ask for revenge, he asked for a bit of reason. But tell me, did you understand what he meant? Or have you forgotten his name like so many others? Martin Luther King would say that violence never was a solution. He believed in another path. But when you watch and re-watch that scene, batons rising and falling, and Rodney's body doesn't even react anymore, you can't help but feel your stomach turn. The question that gets stuck in your chest is not about peace. It's about until when. Until when are you going to accept that this is normal? Until when are you going to watch, turn your face away and think, it's just another case? Because it's not just a case, it never was. Do you know what Martin Luther King saw every time a black person was brought down? He saw his dream bleeding. Because it wasn't a pretty dream to decorate a notebook. It was a dream sown with pain, with imprisonment, with teary eyes in bombed churches. A dream made by hand while the country laughed at the idea that a black man could want equality. Rodney King could be anyone. And that's what scared so many people, because when the tape rolled on TV, it wasn't just him on the ground. It was your brother. It was your son. It was your reflection. And the question was too uncomfortable to ignore. Why is this country so afraid of a black man? Do you feel this question echoing? Do you feel it crossing through time and hitting your chest now? Martin Luther King would feel it. He would feel it because he knew. He knew that when justice turns a blind eye, violence becomes routine. And routine teaches silence, but what about you? Will you stay silent too? Rodney King was beaten by 4 police officers, all white. And even with the video right in front of everyone, they were acquitted. Did you hear that right? They were acquitted. As if nothing had happened. As if the suffering was made up. As if the camera was lying. As if his body wasn't bruised to the bone. Then you stop and think, if even with the truth staring us in the face, the guilty are not held accountable, what more do we need to do? Bleed more, scream louder, live on the asphalt? Martin Luther King knew this wasn't the first time, and deep down, you know it wasn't the last. Because after him others came. Many came. George Floyd came saying he couldn't breathe. Breonna Taylor came sleeping and not waking up. Marielle came with a bullet in her head and silence in the courts. The list is long, but the world pretends it's short. And even so, Rodney's question is still there, stuck in the throat of those trying to live without being swallowed. Can we understand each other? Martin Luther King wouldn't ask you to forgive the unforgivable. He would ask you to look with truth. Look at the system, the structure, the culture that teaches fear of dark skin. He would talk about the root, about how society shapes the idea of who deserves to live. He would tell you there's no neutrality when an entire people are crying out for help, and he would speak directly to you, you who have a voice, you who have a choice, you who don't feel it on your skin, but see it with your eyes. What do you do with what you see? Because while you choose silence, there are people burying their children. There are people teaching children not to run, not to wear the hood, to lower their tone. It's not for manners, it's for survival. Martin Luther King dreamed indeed, but he wasn't naive. He knew the price of every word. He knew that change is unsettling, and that every system will fight to remain. He knew that racism is not an isolated act, it is a structure, and structures do not fall with polite requests. Have you ever seen someone beg not to die? Martin Luther King did. Rodney King lived it. And you can still choose not to pretend that it has nothing to do with you. The pain of that beating is not just Rodney's. It's for those who have skin color similar to his. It's for those who can't make mistakes, can't run, can't resist. Because if they do, they die. Martin Luther King would talk about it, about how the black body is treated as a threat, even when it's still, even when it has done nothing, even when it just wants to go home. He would ask you, what kind of freedom is that which only applies to some? And no, he would not use pretty words to spare you, because it is not the moment to soften things. It is the moment to see, to confront, to not pretend. Rodney King didn't die that day, but a part of him died there. The idea that filming would be enough died there. The hope that showing the truth would be sufficient died there. Because was it? Do you really think it was enough? Martin Luther King would not think so. He would say that justice is still delayed, that the system still decides who is worthy to live, and that this decision, so often, depends on the color of one's skin. You want to believe that the world has changed. But what if it has only changed its mask? When the police officer raises his arm, and the black man on the ground no longer reacts, it's not just about abuse of authority. It's about a life being crushed by everything that has been said and never questioned. It's about a country built on people who were never heard, and who still have to prove every single day that they deserve respect. Martin Luther King did not ask for a favor. He demanded justice. He marched with tired feet but with a soul on fire. And he would not accept you today with so much access, with so much knowledge, pretending to be blind. Because if you see, you are responsible. Rodney King was not the first, nor the last. But he was yet another cry, a cry recorded, broadcasted, publicized, and still ignored by those who needed to act. Martin Luther King would call you closer and ask, whose side are you on? The side of the beaten or the side of those who watch in silence? And he would not wait for your answer. He would look into your eyes and expect you to do something. You see and don't feel, or feel and don't act. Martin Luther King Jr. would see you entirely. He would not look at your color, but he would not ignore it either. He would recognize what it means within this structure, in this system that has long pretended to be blind. But it is not blind. It's complicit, because it sees, chooses, and benefits. It's selective about who deserves to live in peace and who deserves to be targeted. You now need to stop looking for comfort where there is only urgency. There is no more time for speeches that soothe. There is no more room for you to hide your face behind pretty words. Rodney King's body was not pretty that night. It was a black body, wounded, humiliated, on the ground. And there, on that asphalt, he was not just Rodney. He was every man, every boy, every mother who ever swallowed their tears to stay alive. He was the entire history of America, written in sweat and blood. And Martin Luther King would say that history needs to stop being told only by the victors. Because winning with the sole of the boot on someone else's neck is not a victory. It is cowardice decorated with authority. It is the denial of humanity. And denying humanity is exactly where racism settles, disguised as fear. Justified by statistics, validated by those who prefer not to see the truth because it is uncomfortable, because it strips away the comfort of false innocence. But what about you? Are you going to hide behind that curtain too? Martin Luther King would say that justice is not a favor, it is a right. But how many rights does a black man need to beg for to have? How many times does he need to die in public for someone to realize that we are not talking about exaggeration? We are talking about a system that has learned to strike without guilt, and it has learned this because, with each aggression, the response was silence. Or worse, it was doubt. Rodney King was beaten, it was filmed, and yet still they said maybe he deserved it. As if dignity had to be earned. As if his life were for sale and the price was absolute obedience, even when obedience cost physical integrity, even when it was unjust from the beginning. And Martin Luther King would be tired. But he would not be silent. He would stand before you and ask, until when will your comfort be more important than someone else's pain? You can try to justify it. You may even say that the world is more complex, that not everything is racism, that there are contexts. But when the face of a black man is pressed to the ground for minutes on end, when the arm meant to support turns into a fist, when the only weapon of defense is the skin he carries, what context explains that? Martin Luther King would not accept half measures. He would say that racism is a denial of the soul, a moral blindness, a spiritual failure, and every time you stay silent in its face, you are not neutral. You are part of it. And he would continue. Because Martin was not afraid of exhaustion. He faced the cold water, the trained dogs, the prison bars, not for glory, but because he knew that a people who accept racism as part of the landscape have lost the ability to dream with dignity. And if you lose that, what do you have left? Rodney King was not a hero. And that's precisely why he matters. Because he was an ordinary man. And an ordinary man deserves respect. He doesn't need to be a saint. He doesn't need to be a martyr. He doesn't need to be an example. He just needs to be human. And that should be enough, but it's still not, is it? Martin Luther King would scream today. Not with anger, but with a strength that cannot be learned, which comes from the certainty that we can no longer pretend. He would scream because the names keep increasing. He would scream because every time a black person dies at the hands of the state and nothing happens, the world sends a clear message. Black lives are still disposable. Are you hearing this? Or have you gotten used to the pain? Martin Luther King always said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if that phrase still makes sense to you, then you need to understand that it's not about isolated cases. It's about a structure that is designed, maintained, protected. A structure that turns the fear of black people into a control tool, that turns the complaint into an exaggeration, that turns resistance into violence but never questions the violence of the system. And when Rodney King asked us to try to understand each other, he was not saying that everything could be forgotten. He was saying that it needed to be acknowledged, because there is only understanding when there is truth. There is only healing when there is listening. Martin Luther King believed in that. That love is revolutionary, but not a love that remains silent, a love that stands up. That faces hatred without becoming like it, but without backing down in front of it. And you? Will you stand up? Or will you say this is not your problem? Because Martin would say, looking into your eyes, that yes, it is with you. That each of your silences pushes another black body to the ground. That each of your justifications is another shield for those who commit violence. That each it wasn't quite like that is another slap in the face of the truth. Rodney King survived, but he was never the same again. And you shouldn't be either. You saw that. You know what it means. You know that if the name were different, the story would be the same. Because the problem was never Rodney, it was his color. It was what it represents to a society built on the idea that some are worth more. And Martin Luther King would ask you, who taught you that? Who said that your peace needs to come from someone else's silence? But he wouldn't wait for an answer. He would keep walking, keep talking, keep looking into the eyes of those who try to pretend that the problem is the tone, the approach, the manner. And he would ask, what's the right way to ask not to die? Can you answer that? Rodney King tried, not with words, but with his body, with his gaze, with the blood that stained the street. He tried to live. And yet, he was made out to be the culprit. Because racism does that, it flips everything. It makes the victim the problem, it makes the deceased responsible. And it turns silence into state policy. Martin Luther King would say that you can no longer be complicit, that you can no longer live in peace in a world where some live in fear of living. He would call you to the fight. Not the fight with weapons, but the fight of conscience, the fight that begins with your gaze, with your discomfort, with your daily choice not to let it slide. And if you ask yourself what you can do, the answer is not simple. But it starts with you not moving away, not closing your eyes, not changing the subject. It starts with you asking yourself every day, what do I do with the privilege of not feeling this on my skin? Rodney King didn't ask to be a symbol. He asked to live, and that should be enough. Martin Luther King knew it wouldn't be enough, but he never stopped believing that one day it could be. Do you want that same faith? Or have you gotten used to watching the world burn while protecting your bubble? Martin Luther King wouldn't come today to make a beautiful speech. He would come to confront, because there's no more time for beauty, there's only time for truth. And the truth, you know, is right there, on the ground, again. And I will continue, Rodney King didn't die there, but a lot of people died a little with him. And if you didn't feel anything, maybe you've been dead inside for a long time, because only those who have stopped feeling can watch that and go about their day normally. Only those who have gotten used to the absurd can see a man being beaten on national TV and say, but he was resisting. Resisting what? Fear, the ground, death? And if resisting is a crime, What is being black in a country where your skin color is already sentenced? Martin Luther King wouldn't mince words. He would say that America is still a place where justice comes with a last name, where the law serves to protect some and punish others. And you know who he's talking about, because when the police make a mistake with a white person, it's an accident. When they get it right with a black person, it's a merit. When they arrest a white person, it's an exception. When they arrest a black person, it's statistics. And you live with that as if it's normal. You need to stop accepting racism as a flaw. It's not a flaw, it's a project, it's construction, it's heritage, it's the instruction manual of a system that survives by controlling bodies. And the black body has always been the first to be controlled, silenced, subjugated. Martin Luther King would say that racism no longer needs chains. It feeds on looks, on judgment, on the fear that was taught, cultivated, and spread as truth. And he would ask you, who taught you to fear a man just because he's black? Who taught you that his presence is a threat? And who taught you to think that was natural? You never stopped to think about this, did you? Because thinking about it hurts. Because maybe you'll realize that without wanting or knowing, you've already been a part of it. Maybe you crossed the street, avoided eye contact, quickened your pace. Maybe you laughed at a racist joke thinking it was no big deal. But it was. It was the normalization of violence. It was the seed of contempt. It was the most subtle way of cooperating with what beat Rodney King. Martin Luther King wouldn't accuse you. He wouldn't point his finger. But he wouldn't spare the mirror. Because the mirror is where the truth begins. And you need to look at it, even if the reflection shames you. And if you're black, Martin Luther King would embrace you. Not with pity, but with strength, with recognition. He would look into your eyes and say, I see you. I know the weight you carry. I know that every day is a battle. That you need to be strong even when you have no strength, that you swallow frogs, fears, insults, and still you keep walking. And just by walking, you are already resisting. Martin wouldn't romanticize the pain. He wouldn't celebrate the suffering. He fought his whole life so that nobody else would have to suffer like that. But he also knew that suffering reveals the truth that many avoid. Freedom has never been equal for everyone. And you, who are listening to this, maybe you're still trying to understand where you fit into this story. Maybe you think you don't have a place to speak from. Maybe you think it has nothing to do with you. But if you live in a world where Rodney King is beaten and the guilty go free, then it does have to do with you. Because this world is the same one where you breathe, walk, work, and raise your children. And if injustice lives in this world, then it also steps on your path. Martin Luther King always warned, what worries me is not the shout of the wicked. It is the silence of the good. And whose side is your silence on? Do you really think it's enough not to be racist? That's the bare minimum. Being against racism is not an act of heroism. It's an obligation. But being anti-racist is a choice. It's action. It's a daily decision. It's saying no when everyone around you is laughing. It's correcting when the comment is disguised as a joke. It's feeling uncomfortable when the room is full, but there isn't a single black person there. It's using your voice, your privilege, your position to open doors and not reinforce walls. Martin Luther King would die again if he saw how far we still are from the dream. But he would also smile seeing that the dream hasn't died, that there are still people marching. There are still people believing. There are still black children saying they want to be doctors, judges, presidents, and there are still people who hear all of this and decide not to remain silent. You can be that person. But for that, you need to step out of the comfortable maybe zone. You need to stop saying you understand and start taking a stand. Because understanding doesn't save lives. Understanding doesn't change laws. Understanding doesn't give breath back to those who shouted, I can't breathe, until they were silenced. Only action changes things. Only taking a stand transforms. Only commitment breaks the cycle. Martin Luther King never preached resignation. He preached resistance. He preached courage. He preached faith. But faith that walks, that faces, that takes risks. And he would put you against time, because time doesn't wait. Because while you think someone dies, while you hesitate, someone is wrongfully imprisoned. While you argue, someone is beaten as if they were invisible. How many more videos will you wait for to take action? How many more names before you start to care? How many more protests before you wake up? Martin Luther King would say that the time for passivity is over, that silence is no longer an option, that if you feel anything in the face of all this, then it's already time to act. And he would end not with a promise, but with a question. Are you willing to continue? Or are you going to watch all of this, turn off the video, and go on with your life as if nothing had been said? The choice is yours, but the price of your choice is often not paid by you. And that is the greatest tragedy of all. Share this blessed video so it can touch and help others like you and me. Don't forget to click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for being part of our community. Here are 2 more videos for you to continue your spiritual quest and growth in faith. Thank you and God bless you all. See you soon.